Perfect. So, once again, a very big welcome and thank you for joining us. Today's session is titled Introduction to Digital Ethnography. And as I said earlier, it is a part of our Research Methods Explainer series. Now, before we completely dive in, let me introduce Kashf to anyone new with us today. We're a non-profit initiative of researchers from South Asia based at different universities like Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, JNU, DU, amongst others, dedicated to making research and learning in social sciences and humanities more accessible, especially for learners in non-metro regions or underserved institutions. And now that we look back on how far we've come since the launch this year, we realize that at Kashf, our work began with a very simple observation that some of the most foundational skills in humanities and social sciences, like how to read a text closely, think through the theories and methods that you've been taught, or even just ask sharp questions that are critically, engaging with what we're learning, are often sidelined in our pedagogy. And many of us have felt this gap firsthand. So, Kush is our small but deliberate response to this. It's a space for pause, for returning to fundamentals not as just a remedial step, but as a way of honoring the labor of thought, a reminder that scholarship can still be slow, generous, meaningful, and quite serious. We've hosted free informative training sessions, sometimes multiple in a month, covering everything from the basics of research to writing a proposal, literature review, how to reference. We've also hosted writing workshops, even special sessions co hosted with seminar forums in Oxford and other institutions. And to reach more learners, we've also started offering sessions in regional languages because we feel like language should not be a barrier to learning. And there's a lot more to come, and your input really shapes it. So, if any of you think of a session topic or collaboration, or feel like there's a gap that needs to be addressed, do let us know, and we'll do our best to make it happen. If you found Kashf helpful, we'd be grateful if you could share it with other students or researchers who might benefit. And do subscribe to our mailing and follow us on social media for all the updates. We'll put in all the links towards the end of the session as well. And your encouragement goes a long way in fueling the work we do. To introduce you to the panelists of this beautiful session, it is my pleasure to introduce Ashique Ali T. He's a PhD researcher at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Information and a member of the Socio-Technical Resistance and Ethical Technologies Lab. His research uses digital ethnography to explore and examine how technology shapes resistance, collective action, and solidarity within marginalized communities. And his work focuses on work unionization, on digital labor platforms, social movements, and anti caste resistance, contributing to broader conversations on technology, power, and social change. And we're absolutely delighted to welcome Ashique to this session on digital ethnography and truly look forward to the insights and perspectives that he will be sharing with us. With that, I hand it over to Ashique. Yeah, you can start your presentation as well.
Thank you, Pavadi. Thank you, Kash, for the invite. Let me share the presentation. So, I work in the field called human-computer interaction and computer-supported cooperative
But
work. It's called as
Ashique, sorry to interrupt you. Could you disable the annotations before you go ahead? I mean, if you have not already done it. Sorry to cut you in between. It'll be on the top of the screen. The toggle would come up, and if you click on the three dots, it will show disable annotation for others.
yeah, got it. Yeah. So much of my research methods or my training is shaped by my field, which is known as HCI and CSCW. And digital ethnography is very broadly used in various disciplines, including sociology, anthropology, in a lot of disciplines. And there would be a lot of overlaps and convergences with these methods over across disciplines. So Firstly, I would like to discuss what digital ethnography is, how it is actually different from some of the other digital research methods you might be familiar with, or what is particularly valuable in digital ethnography. So I'll give you a broad overview of this method as a whole, I'll try to make it very simple. And I'll also offer a case study alongside one of the work I did, like in some sections on the steps I took for the methodological approaches. So to begin with, like if you look at what is digital ethnography, this is a method which has been in prevalence at least or in evolution since 90s, particularly since the expansion of internet technologies. So as internet became increasingly popular or widespread, scholars started asking like, how do we see internet not only as a technology, but also as a social space which is worthy of ethnographic inquiry. So there was a growing interest in this method, largely prompted by the expansion of digitalization. And a lot of researchers started adopting traditional ethnographic methods to the realm of ICTs, or information communication and technology studies. So it begin with a lot of scholarly effort in attempting to immerse the researcher in the online setting for a very extended period of time, and also for an aspiration of developing a very holistic understanding of culture now, which is understood as mediated or negotiated through technology. So some of the early works which has shaped this method or like conversation, one of them is Howard Reynolds' Virtual Community in 1993. So at that point, like drawing on the experience as a member of the well basically meant the whole earth electronic link, one of the earliest online communities which was founded around 1985. And Reingold was basically arguing that virtual communities are no less real than a physical space. So he describes this space as a place where like people talk, argue, exchange information, organize politically, like form meaningful relationships. In other words, online communities was argued that like it exhibit many of the properties which offline communities would also exhibit, or like some of the contradictions or like social dynamic, what we often associate with offline dynamic also associate with that. Another influential contribution came from Sherry Turkle and the Life on the Screen. This was a very influential work in 1997, and she argued that like internet created a space where identity could be experienced as separate from the physical body, and the anonymity which was now offered by the cyberspace enabled people to experience different aspects of themselves or explore multiple identities, and sometimes even engage in like the art of deception. So for Turkle, the multiplicity of identity was not necessarily a problematic thing, and she was viewing it as offering opportunities for explorations and self-discovery. And there was a lot of work in this period in early 2000s too. Like we had a lot of emerging work. And I think one of the foundational work should be seen as like Christine Hein's virtual ethnography. This was a really interesting work. And Christine argued that internet should be understood as something people use and experience as part of their daily lives rather than a world apart. So earlier works, some of them had the notion that cyberspace is something distinct, whereas from 2000 onwards, we have started to see a lot of conversation which was saying that, okay, this is more integrated. It is not something like a monolithic or like a closed experience happening somewhere else, which is also increasingly linked to the people's participation and perception in their everyday life. And Daniel Miller and Don Salter also had an interesting work, Internet and Ethnographic Approach. It was based in Trinidad, and it demonstrated that internet use is actually shaped by local cultures, relationships, social context, etc. So together, all of these studies were actually relocating the internet from a realm of like virtual world to an integral part of ordinary social life. So from there on, like the field has drastically expanded, and researchers has begun studying a much wider range of digital technologies, which now includes even mobile phone ethnographies, social media platforms, messaging apps, feeds, recommendation systems, algorithms, a lot of ways. Even recently in machine learning systems, people are also even like adopted ethnographic approaches to see how large language models are trained, like by using this kind of methodological approaches. So I think what is more important, is to recognize that though ethnography exists in various different names, like virtual ethnography, ethnography, or like various different ways, it's not actually a new method. It's a extension of a old method, because digital ethnography, in some sense, in a very conservative definition, if I would say, is an adaptation of ethnography's core sensibilities, which include sustained immersion, participation, in the online culture, and thick description to the social worlds that are like partly or wholly constituted through like digital media. So this is emphatically not the same as scrapping social media data using APIs like Twitter APIs or WhatsApp APIs. These are some of the methods which a lot of researchers use in gathering big data or large quantities of data and analyzing, or doing content analysis with social media sites. So there's a subtle distinction between these kind of digital approaches with digital ethnography. So it is one thing that digital ethnography is carried out in digital field, but like when in another sense, if you ask this question, if it is ethnography which is traveling with it, like what makes it ethnographic, or like rather than just merely online. So one important aspect, which is also common to the traditional ethnography, which Clifford Geertz I would have like argued, is one is immersion. It's ethnography is fundamentally about thick description, and it's an interpretive analysis. So I'll come with the begin with the aspect of immersion. So what distinguishes digital ethnography from a lot of other methods? One is the role of researchers. So instead of observing something from distance or simply collecting large volumes of online data, here the researcher or ethnographer becomes immersed in field over a period of time. So they log in regularly, participate in the communities, online communities, and they learn the rhythms, norms, languages, slangs in these communities. Also build relationships often. Not the building relationship is not common to all of ethnographic approaches, but like digital ethnographic approaches. But in many of the studies, we also seen people actually building ethnographies. So for example, if you're like, let's say we are studying a Barcelona football fans group, you're not scrapping the data of the Facebook group using Facebook API here, but rather there's a sustained participation, ongoing observation, and also an attempt to for sense making of what is happening in this community on an everyday basis. So this is what would make this method distinct from other like scrapping methods which people would be knowing about. And the second part is like, as I earlier mentioned, about how do we describe these interactions. So like digital affordances in some sense provide us to collect a lot of thin descriptions as well as thick descriptions. I would break it down in a very easy example. So the goal here in ethnography or digital ethnography is it's not about simply recording what people do, but to actually understand what their actions mean to themselves. Or this means that paying attention to participants' own categories, their own shared understanding, inside jokes, values, moral worlds or worldviews, etc. So take something simple as like a laugh emoji, which you would all use in WhatsApp interactions or a Facebook. So it's obvious in the first glance that it might indicate laugh. This would count as a thin description of what is happening, or the person posted a, like emoji. But is that person actually genuinely laughing, or is it also something which people use to soften disagreements in online communities, or is that interaction a way of avoiding maybe direct response, or is it a sarcasm, or is it a way of signaling solidarity with others? So there are various ways in which a simple emoji could function in an online community, right, or in our own everyday interactions. So the purpose of ethnographer is also to make sense of what this means, like not just like looking at what are the interactions, text or like emojis or whatever they're using, but also to make sense of what is the purpose in which they are using these interactions. So one, like without understanding that context of like why what something is happening, we would be rather like only observing social actions, which is not the purpose here. So the purpose is to understand the social meaning, which is why like the classical ethnography's method is so important over here. And so when you try yourself like the ethnographic approaches in digital spaces, the effort should not be simply counting likes, comments, or reading it, but going a layer beyond that. And another aspect is that because digital interaction is also digitally mediated, we get a lot of digital traces, which also can be analyzed statistically. Or some of these interpretations is very useful. For example, much of the work, like some of my earlier work, I did scrap a lot of tweets from a particular hashtag, like did sentimental analysis to get a sense of like how the temperament of the public was. It is useful for digital ethnography, but in per se, stats doesn't mean anything. So softwares and digital technologies in the other ways of collecting digital traces helps us to code, organize, search, visualize, analyze this data, or make some sense of it. But it's important to note that like all of these other methods can assist your analysis, but it per se do not produce any ethnographic understanding. Ethnographic understanding has to be your own effort of an everyday interaction, an everyday effort, and you can use these timestamps to complement your work. And another part is the point about participation and reflexivity. In digital ethnography, the researcher is quite literally the research instrument, because your account, your profile, your posting history, how you have interacted in the past, all will shape what you will be actually able to see, or what communities you gain access to, or who is willing to engage with you. So like your like digital history itself actually determines a lot of the ways in which the research will actually unfold. For example, like if you're trying to attempt a new research in YouTube, for example, your past search histories would actually influence what are the categories you are going to see or not going to see. So researchers need to be mindful of that, like because your own interaction, your own past data is going to shape your data too. And this also is important because we are not actually looking for what is simply there, but what is culturally enacted through people's practices of engaging these algorithms or navigating these algorithms, which are constantly changing and unstable. So this is the other tricky part of doing ethnography. Like a lot of data get deleted, a lot of data get edited. Like people could edit post in Facebook groups, they would delete it, or like this is like sometimes even the platform might itself ban some of this, censor some of these comments or sections of. So there are a lot of instabilities or difficulties with doing this too. So as an ethnographer, like one must be at most reflexive about like how their own presence, how this platform dynamics is also playing out, and how these algorithmic systems also shape the field you're actually studying. So this should also be part of your research field note. So like if you're like encountering some of these instabilities or like things which you are not able to make sense of, it is perfectly fine, because algorithms are opaque object. They do not often reason with you. Like it's often the people who make sense with algorithms by interacting with them, and they've developed their own folk theories to understand how the system works. So like most influencers in Instagram would have a particular kind of understanding which they have developed over the period of time because of using the platform. And it always need not be the technically the best way of describing it, but it's what their experience is about. So this is one part of, sorry, just a minute. So yeah. So this is one another part which you need to be mindful of. So in ethnography, it is fundamentally about like immersion. It's not about extracting a lot of data. It is also about developing text descriptions. And like it's all about a participation and reflexivity in an everyday basis. And also we should understand that the digital practices often are not restricted to the media which we are analyzing itself. It could be like go beyond that, because people use their digital practices would be also shaped by how they are in the home, workplaces, like how they are the social spaces they would be encountering beyond that. And digital ethnography's limitation is also this, like you cannot know beyond a point. You are only largely going to get sense of what is appearing in front of you, which is one of the, like, I would not say it's a problem, but it's like there's a sort of a limitation of this method too, which is why a lot of ethnographers uh, complement digital ethnography with other modes of methods like traditional interview methods and like group discussions and things like that. People use it in a combination of ways. So yeah, so these are some of the recent works which, not recent works, some of the key works which I think you could refer to, like particularly Gabriela Coleman's ethnographic approaches to like digital media is a really interesting one. And like Ethnography for Internet by Christine Nine is also a really important work. Gabriela Coleman also have written a work on hacker culture, which is quite interesting. And she has went into the cyber cultures of like how hackers interact and over the period of time. And she has a couple of books over it. So these are some of the good examples of ethnographies, all digital ethnographies, which also complement with sometimes traditional interview methods and other form of things. So Coleman's work is not merely looking at the digital culture alone, but it's also about mixing methods from other approaches. And if you want to get a sense of like a variety of different ways in which it is being done, the Routledge Companion to Digital Ethnography is really a good one. And Digital Ethnography, the edited by Sarah Pink and others, is also a really useful resource in that sense. So now I'll move to like the question of field. So in digital ethnographies, the field is often constructed. It's not something you find by yourself. Because unlike some of the traditional qualitative methods where like you might be fixated with the geographically bounded locations, in my experience, when doing digital ethnography, it is often better to define the field on the basis of research question and what allows you, what you want to do, things like that. So it's often, there's a lot of researchers on sensibilities going into the construction of the data sets. So in one of my recent papers, I used digital ethnography for the purpose of studying up. Studying up basically means like traditionally, much of the social science has been focused around, in some sense, excavating the experiences of marginalized and producing descriptions of victimhoods of, or like some sense of marginality. But we often lack studies on studying up about like people in positions of power. And one of the biggest difficulty researchers face is access to this field site, and digital ethnography could be one of the way in which like you could negotiate this. This is the crux of the argument in this paper. And here I can talk a little bit about like how I went about in constructing my own data set. So, so for me, the objective of my study in this paper was to study up. So I went about deciding I'm going to study the Brahmin community in Kerala. Kerala because I'm familiar with the language, and also because like Kerala is otherwise often known as a progressive state where caste is often like invisibilized. So there are like scholarly concerns around why I choose a field. So these are some of the decisions which went into my field decisions. Now, since I went about deciding what I'm going to do, so I started my data collection somewhere around in February 2022, and I started with purposively using keyword searches such as like Kerala Brahmin vegetarian recipes or Kerala Brahmin recipes. In the screen, I've just put Tamil vegetarian blogs because I don't want to like reappear my own search cells from the past. So once you do this keyword search, you will find a lot of like references around like the thing which you're going about. So in this case, it's very purposive because I knew that looking for vegetarian is a proxy way of understanding caste, which is why I intentionally went behind chose this hashtag. So, but like, as I said, like Brahmanism is expressed and reproduced through vegetarian practices. So I followed these practices and used these keywords. one of the first step I did was cataloging the URLs of these channels. So for example, if it's appear like this, I would go into the food lover, means I would click on another tab, open the first result in another tab, and basically look for the channel's URL. I would copy to an Excel sheet and create a database of that. So first attempt is to create a Excel sheet or like Google sheet around the URLs which you're finding from your keyword search. So there's a keyword which you're using in the case of YouTube, and then copying the URLs of this particular post. So this is my initial entry point to the field. So like I could start tracing who are the creators, who are the audiences, digital practices, everything. So one thing to note that in my case, I went about with this functionality first by using my browser's incognito mode. One, as I said earlier, I didn't want to like influence my past searches onto my new results. So incognito mode is something which I preferred. So it's because I want to minimize the influence on my own user behavior on the search result, and then it does not completely eliminate personalization because of the extensive way in which Google collect data, but it still can reduce some of its effects. Second, the thing which you have to note also is that the platform actually shapes the way you construct this data set. For example, YouTube have an infinite scroll architecture. So like as you keep scrolling, more and more results will keep appearing. So there are some other social media platforms where it is like they use the platform architecture would be based on pagination, where you would have like page number 1, 2, 3, 4, so you could click up to it. So here the practical methodological question is that if platform keeps showing you more content, where do you actually stop collecting data? So how do you decide how many links or channels should be included in your database in the URL list which you're making? So these are methodological decisions which researchers need to think through and justify when they're like, often the reviewer in the paper would ask you how to justify your decisions. So it's often important to think through what you're doing and looking for the justifications, like why you're doing what. So that needs to be always also should be something which you should be adding up in your field notes. So here, in my case, I established a stop criterion once the algorithmic recommendations diverged significantly from the domain of vegetarian food cultures. So I have started with the keyword of vegetarian food blogs. Once I went about and about, like after 45, 50 minutes, you would see that like the results are like not anymore about like vegetarian blogs. It would start appearing something else. That's the point at which I stopped. So in some other social media, if it is a paginated architecture, platform architecture, people could also create a criteria that I will go for the first 30 pages or 35 pages. It's fine to go around it. You might find saturation before that also, but like you still have an estimate of how many results you would be systematically doing, because you're doing it anyway on a random basis. So the second, once you do this, once you have collected all the channel names on your like Excel database, the next thing to do is conduct a preliminary audit. So in my case, when I did some of these results, there are channels like I copied the URL because they were vegetarian blogs. But on a deeper examination of it, I would found that like, okay, some of them also do meat-oriented contents like mutton biryani or things. So I have to eliminate those kind of things from the data sets. So you do a quick verification of the channel listing over the things and see whether the contents are like congruent or like have some sense of like familiarity. That is something you can do the next thing. And then often we'll also find new content from the recommendation, like the sidebars and platform. You would find a new content. You could also add them to the channel. So this is an iterative way of constructing the data set. This is how you would go about constructing the data sets. Now, once like this is done, you could start excluding a lot of, because you cannot watch all the videos all through the life. The enormous amount of content is produced in digital media every day. So in my case, when I did this initial screening, I took like, I got some 23 women bloggers and 9 male bloggers. I excluded the male bloggers because they also do commercial food culture, like restaurants and catering promotions, which women bloggers were not doing. And I excluded all the non-Malayalam speaking bloggers because some of the bloggers also use multilingual keywords to get results to a wider audience. So I eliminated the non-Malayalam speaking vloggers, and I only included the channels which had a subscribers of at least minimum 1,000. So this is the exclusion and inclusion criteria I went about with. And eventually, like when I applied it, it came down to like 6 women bloggers. So this is how I shortened the like channels. And now the problem is each channel would have like some 300, 400 content over the period of time. So the first thing, once I just finalize the 6 data sets, record the metadata on the particular day. Like, so if this is June 15th, I'm looking at the like the 6 channels, I record the account creation date on this particular day, what is the subscriber count and total views of these channels, and roughly look at how much of the videos are there. And then like, so in my data set, I also had 3 larger channels and 3 smaller channels, which was intentional because the smaller channels were chosen because some of the smaller channels also had high content interactions or high views. Some of them had 50,000 views, but only have like 1,100 like subscribers. So I also include, so to be inclusive, like I made the content with the deliberate structuring of like 3 large channels and 3 small channels. And I went about like across a range of videos. So here, this is one way of constructing the data set. And like there's no one way of doing it. Depending on your research question, there will be a lot of different ways in which people actually construct their data sets. So there's one interesting articulation which I found always interesting. Is the articulation by Jenna Burrell, where like she said, field is often a network where you have to trace the connection among people, object, platforms, even from an entry point to outward, and look at the site analytically, not geographically. So this is a very useful information or an approach. And the other thing is that often, if you're looking beyond, since your digital ethnography is often guided by the research question, when you look around a particular culture, you might also encounter instances where the interaction happening in multiple different platforms. In one of my recent studies, I found that like things are happening in Facebook, but eventually I realized that it's also happening in WhatsApp group for coordinating some of these activities, and they also had an annual meetup. So it was a like multiple platforms, also on-site interaction. So you will have to go through this, like follow the traces was more an easy approach for me. So, so it's more about researchers' routines, like you have to catch up, look for exploration, archiving, and there's no fixed boundaries of this. And it's always important to know that most communities rarely live in one place, like it would be dispersed across multiple communities. So how do you like then approach the digital communities if you want to do this research? One thing is to clearly understand where the community lives, how different platforms actually shape what you can observe. Like, is the community organized through a closed Facebook groups? Then your way of accessing is very different. You'll have to look for the content moderator, the moderators or admins or community elders seek an access to it. If it is a public YouTube channel, it is relatively more straightforward and easy. And if it only is existing on X or Reddit, sometimes hashtags would be the way to understand the thing. For example, if you scroll about Dalit Lives Matter, you would find a lot of contents that in Twitter. So that's one way of like finding out. So a lot of it depends on like which platform you're using and what modality. This is flexible, and according to your needs, you can look around that. And one of the interesting thing is that once you gain access, you might have to, for example, in closed Facebook groups or closed digital publics, you will also have to, often it is nice to introduce yourself and declare in Facebook groups that you are actually doing a research rather than doing it anonymously. So in that way, you can over the period also become a member of that group and then also start participating in the research processes. And you can so most often researchers start as lurkers or observers, passive observers. Over the period of time, they will become observer participants, like a little bit of participating in the conversations, maybe then would move to like participant observation or like sometimes even more engaged. So there's a various degree in which you could involve. So it is often better to move beyond the stage of lurker if possible, but some of the studies like would not allow you to do that, but it depends on what you're working on. So the field notes, you should take it like in my case, what I usually do is when I observe things, there's a lot of visual context playing around in the YouTube screen. So one of the things I do is that I open my audio recorder and then narrate it myself on my interpretation of what is going on into the audio script. That's why it's more easy. So if one way of doing it, some people write it elongated field notes. I use audios and then transcript like some AI text. So that is one of the easier options. Some people do an extensive amount of screenshotting. I also did that. And platform traces can be accumulated even through other methods. Like if you have a Python, like you could actually bulkily mine all of this data and the various ways in which catching traces. So it's a combination of strategies which depends on how you want to do it. So in my case, when I went about viewing this, I did not watch one channel extensively at single point. I took one video from each channel and rotated. So I watched one creator at a time. Then I moved to the next creators, one video, then the third creators, then one video. And I kept on rotating it so that I got it's better to get a sense of pattern and template through such a kind of approach than going unitarily through one particular way. And the most important thing is ethics. This is also one of the most contested part of doing digital ethnography. Just because a data is public doesn't mean you can use it. Most often consent also should be seen as a process. Like there is in some groups you can enter, like Facebook groups, you can ask the admin and get in. But over the period of time, a lot of new members would be coming in and the consent process becomes more complicated. You don't know like how much you will take consent and things like that. So taking consent is a very challenging process. So where possible in like WhatsApp groups or things, you could actually take the consent, announce yourself as a researcher. You could sometimes pin the message in the like Facebook group too, like that I'm a researcher and doing this particular work. And in places where you cannot do it, try to minimize harm. That is one thing. And in like intentionally not cause any harm or alter the community in any particular ways. And you also have to understand that anonymity is very fragile because even if you take quotes from these conversations, people can search back and find who the participant is because it's all digital traces. So often it is better advised to paraphrase or when I'm doing in Malayalam, I'm like intentionally translating it in English because it avoids getting back. So you have to find a method of ensuring that your participants are not traceable back to avoid harms in other ways. And particularly when you're researching with marginalized communities, you need to be extra careful because not every researcher will have a cultural competency over the subject or the discussion what is happening. So a lot of researchers, Shamlika's one of the work has highlighted that how when researchers use Black Twitter hashtags and things, the community did not really appreciate it. And because people, if you do not have a cultural competence over the community, you might actually introduce a lot of harms than any potential benefit to the researchers. And there are a lot of various ways. I'm not going to deep into this, but you could mix this method with interviews. Walkthrough methods is one other way. Trace ethnography is like completely looking upon the log data and documented traces. There is also like APIs which you can pull out if you have like a lot of if you're some expertise in Python, there's a lot of ways of pulling out data in various different ways, which can be used in combination of this. But what is more important is that you can use this method in complementary with a lot of other methods. And there's a lot of other challenges, particularly in the current age. APIs have become really expensive. So even if you're mining data, most often researchers are doing it without the permission of the platform. So you need to be very careful about the lawsuits which some of these platforms can put you on. So scraping data, you should be doing it only if needed, or even when you're doing it, present the findings in a net aggregate rather than something which can be called back to individual participants. And particularly some of these platforms are scrapping API access for researchers, particularly since Trump and also because of Elon Musk, a lot of changes have happened in the field in this. But this actually offers a lot of possibilities because things which you cannot observe in past, you can actually do a lot of work around that. There's a lot of new kind of cultures which are emerging, data publics, meme related polity, influencer economies. So there's a lot of new phenomena which digital culture has brought in, and this method actually helps you go around all of it. And another benefit of digital ethnography is that you can record a lot of interactions which in a traditional ethnography you cannot. Like I struggle in doing traditional ethnography sometimes because the volume of field notes I have to write is like enormous and I cannot process beyond a point. But with digital ethnography, you can always go back. Like even you can always return to the same file, return it, and then like look back, record it. You can download it and transfer the audio automatically. There's a lot of possibilities with regard to all of this. And if you, along with immersion, if you are able to use a lot of other kind of mapping or relational making exercises along with the data, which could actually give you a lot of patterns which you would otherwise not observe in a traditional ethnography. So there are a lot of possibilities regarding this. Like if I have to talk a little bit on what I am trying to argue in my own work is that one, as I like earlier said, like a lot of studies historically, particularly in computer science, which have looked into people, or even in traditional anthropology, there is always an obsession about savage slot, studying the marginalized, looking at the victim stories, talking about it in a particular way. So Michel Rolf Trilliot have like this brilliant article which like critiques and like talks about the importance of studying up. And it's also sometimes important to move beyond the archives of suffering, which because often in the case of caste, it does not often helps us understand how caste actually functions. You're just looking into experiences of people and their victim stories. So there is a particular gaze surrounding it. And this is also influenced by the access to field because caste privileged researchers like can access both the worlds. And yet we could see that they rarely study like the caste privileged social worlds. And if caste oppressed researcher actually try to study their own community, as Gopal Guru would have mentioned, like it would be described as emotional, polemical, it's not objective enough. Whereas when you try to study a caste privileged world, it's highly challenging. Your access is blocked. You will not get access to a lot of these social spaces where elites are and institutional exclusions. And universities also won't give you REBs, like research ethics board permissions. So there's a lot of challenges around studying up the positions of power, whether it be and a lot of other practical challenges. You need to have an elite pedigree or a proximity to wealth and political power to even mingle or like socialize in some of these settings. Or like some of the researchers won't be able to blend into elite social settings. And in some contexts, if you self-disclose your identity, it can actually cause you a lot of harm. Not like every space you will escape with like without physical harm. So there's a lot of asymmetrical power relations between the participants. Not all research is where like the researcher will have a power relation where they are in a dominant position. If you're studying elites, your participants will be sitting over top of you and could cause actual active harms. So because of all of these reasons, I'm arguing that like there's a work which I did with Agas Solanki and Priyank, where digital ethnography can actually be a potential entry point for accessing exclusionary life worlds and also broadening the like social scholarship in one sense. So that's broadly it. Would open it to like any questions or
Thank you so much, Ashik. That was a very insightful session and a beautiful introduction to this space and how the working goes. We'd love to hear your questions now, so please feel free to raise your hands or drop in your questions on the chat messages. You're welcome to kind of send it to us privately as well. You can send it to me, to Ashik, or even Vidushi, whoever you see with Kashf. We'll address that as well.
Okay.
Think everybody's,
Uh,
yeah, everybody's
Ashwati has one.
sinking it in. Yeah.
Oh, Piyush, you can go first. I can wait. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is not directly related to the presentation, but then I am from a cultural studies background, but then the research methodology classes that we take in our university when we join PhD, that is not at all helpful. So like people like me are totally clueless about how can we use a qualitative research tool. So can you suggest something on that, any platform where I can learn about how to use Atlas TI, for example, or MaxQDA. I recently learned about them from YouTube videos, but those were not that helpful for me to use directly. So if you can say something briefly on this. Thank you.
I think Coursera has a lot of resources. Coursera have a lot of MOOC courses which actually provides introduction to a lot of digital tools, like not just Atlas, but even if you want to study spatial mapping or like use a lot of GIS tools like QGIS or ArcGIS, you will find a lot of these resources in mm, like sites like such as Coursera. And some of, if you want, unless you want a certificate, it's free largely. And other places where you can access, a lot of the labs would have recorded sessions on digital methods. Uh, like there is a university called as University of Umeå in Sweden, which have a DigiSocial, no, which have a DigiSoc kind of a lab, which actually have a lot of recordings and lectures on uh, how to use digital methods. Similarly, I can also think of Georgia Tech also have YouTube channels which like talk largely about scraping data on and even like various kind of digital methods. So I think some of this would be like be interesting to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ashwati, did you have a question? Or did I miss on seeing your hand raised? Or
But like I said, I am okay going last. There are more questions popping up in the comment section.
I see one more hand raised. Insha, if you would like to unmute, we'll first take the questions with the hands raised, and then I'll kind of go in between the chat box in this. Yeah.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much for this session. Actually, I'm working about sacred spaces in Kashmir, and I want to connect to that how women negotiate their agency by inhabiting those sacred spaces. But while doing my research, I found a lot of women actually organizing these spaces through social media, like group chats, podcasters, etc. So I want to ask, it is methodologically valid to combine the physical ethnography of these sacred spaces with digital ethnography of the same community? Like, can I do that?
Yeah, most like it depends. Like most often we are doing research either at the level of PhD or MPhil, which would have institutional mandates. Your advisor would be determining what you can do or not. But if you're doing it from a publication perspective, submitting to journals or book chapters, you definitely can go with multiple different methods. And there are a lot of new journals which will be very open to mixed methods, combining various side of like opportunities, like platform studies. Platform studies journal is one of the examples. There's also Big Data and Society, which also is very open to like mixed methods from qualitative studies plus like social media studies. And to answer that, it would be largely determining on the basis of how much data you want to collect. One of the difficulty with digital ethnography is that you might sometimes get overwhelmed with the quantity of data you might collect. It's true that you can collect a lot of data, but like sometimes you might get uh, like thousands and thousands of chats and like posts to analyze. So based on your like feasibility and what you want to do with your research question, it's perfectly fine to go with it. And but you should always be careful also about like in most often the data set per se forms only a less than 50% of your paper. If you think it in a publication sense, it will be like 30 to 40%. So often collecting more data is not the best way. Sometimes it's always better to analyze the existing data and see if a new data is really needed or not. So there's no point in prolonging the field site unendingly just for the sake of collecting data, but like if you find your existing analysis can be enhanced by a new form of data, then I would say like it would be really valuable.
Thank you so much.
Perfect. So we also have a question from our chat box. Ramsha is asking, I am working on digital activism, focusing on Twitter's role in Nigeria and South Africa. I will be using digital ethnography. So how should I proceed initially as a fresher PhD scholar? So any tips for a person just starting out into this process?
Twitter recently is a very tricky space. One, earlier, the way researchers used to collect data is they are largely accessing APIs from Twitter application programming interface, where you will get an API key, which you will use it through software or Python codes to extract data. That's a like traditional way of like doing bulk data collection in like Twitter. And with that, um, people used to complement observing certain kind of hashtags or particular communities which is springing up and trying to make sense of what is happening in the like hashtag based communities. So it actually helps you to get a richer understanding of things, and then you can complement this with the kind of data which you collected with the scrape data. So since it has become paid option, one possible way of doing it is like screenshotting it. But again, it would depend on you finding appropriate hashtags or communities to filter your particular keyword, so that you can extensively try screenshotting methods as a way of like preserving the databases. And Twitter also has a problem of a lot of bot activities where not all the users necessarily need to be human. Much of the conversation in most of the hashtags is like 40 to 50% automated bots, which is like in India, if you study social movements, you would encounter BJP IT cells, bots from Taiwan and different parts of the world coming and popping up the data set. You would also see a lot of spamming of data in these particular communities where advertising agencies also co-opt hashtags. Even if it's by on a social movement, you would often find that it's being appropriated for advertising purposes on completely non-related purpose. So uh, since it doesn't have a group-based structure in Twitter, it is really challenging, but it's possible. It's possible because you can adopt screenshotting methods, or you can just copy paste the metadata in an Excel sheet and over a period of time, and you could record the time you're starting it, the day you're starting it, and the number of feeds you are actually analyzing. So if you're in a particular day, you're copying like 150 tweets or something, you would just copy it and keep a log of like, this is the particular time in which I recorded. This is the amount of data which I have made sense of. And in Twitter, it's also important to analyze the interactions which comes in the thread. So it's not just the post, but also the like responses and other kind of things. So this is why it makes data collections tricky. So I would like the easy way to do is screenshotting or like having a logbook which you copy paste this rather than the traditional API method.
Perfect. Thank you. We also have a question that is along these lines in terms of that we've been asked by Mrinalini. She's talking about how would timelines work, especially in digital spaces, when doing data collection, like the duration of data collection. I'll actually match that with Bhumika, who's asked since does the ephemeral nature of digital content pose a particular challenge while you're collecting and analyzing these data? So how would you deal with that in terms of the timelines of data collection, as well as the short nature of those data spaces, and how is that particular challenge also analyzed? Yeah.
Like since it's not like you're not doing content analysis, which is by scraping a lot of data and looking for it, you don't always need a clean data. Ethnographic records are often written for like finding a particular theme or pattern, or like you're using some of these data largely for purpose of illustrating a particular sensibilities or cultural sense of a particular group. So it's not often required to like look for collecting the entirety of data. So even if it's some data is there or not there, it's fine. So you're not like logging the data per se. And the first one was duration of data collection. And it's again depends on the like what community you're working in. For example, if you're researching a particular online subculture, uh, it would be either organized through a Facebook groups, a closed groups, or an open group. In such spaces, it is more easy to make sense of what participation means. When you are starting to participate in it, you will understand what this slang means, what this shortcode means. You would find that some of the subcultures would have a lot of shortcodes, their own, like they communicate in a particular way, which may not be immediately sensible to a lot of other people. So over the period of time, you will make sense of like what these interactions are. So if in closed spaces or relatively open spaces, which is defined as a like a structured community, like in the way of Facebook group, Reddit, it's more easy to do it. But if you're following hashtags, that is where the challenge lies, because depending on the like if you like depending on how many likes a particular tweet or something gets, the order and hierarchy all keeps changing. And it is fine as well, because like you are again not looking into the bulk informations, but you're looking at how various people are interacting. So it's more about how you take field notes rather than you trying to copy paste or collect a lot of data. Rather, it's also always about like how much you can, how much field notes you can take, how much of things you are observing, what are the different patterns you are observing, what is useful in it, what is meaningful in it. Go only for the meaningful part, just transcribe or like just copy paste the things which are literally meaningful, because ethnography is not a 1 or 2 days exercise either. So it's often a long process where it takes a lot of time. I took really 2 years to finish the YouTube blog project, despite spending like 2 hours of a day or like uh, on a particular video, because some of this is very really time consuming. So you don't need to the first day or 2 day, you may not find anything, but like often after a long period of time or like after like 30 days or 15 days, you would start actually finding patterns. You would start getting a sense of what people are actually talking. So rather than looking for the quantity of data, it's useful to look for the quality of your data set and your interpretations and what you make sense of it. So to understand how a subculture communicates a particular keyword, you don't need a lot of data. You could like, once you understand it, it's your field now. So you could actually work with that. So focus on maybe collecting more field notes, writing more notes, rather than bulkily like getting into a lot of data sets.
Thank you. So we also have somebody who's raised their hands, Rahul. I hope not mispronouncing your name as well. Feel free
Right.
to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, I hope I'm audible. Hi, Ashique. Uh, uh, Hi, Parvati. Ashique, that was an excellent presentation. I'm joining from New Delhi and I work on the Indian diaspora in United Kingdom. I just wanted to give an example, and I had a couple of questions regarding my PhD project. So I did a sociological study on the diaspora in UK, and I had my field visit and all. But I also have a digital ethnographic part to it as to how these communities, how these diaspora communities, project their identity, how they reassert their identity. So my question is, when the ethical part of your presentation came, I had a glitch in my connection. So I missed out on something. So I want to ask that, let's say I'm performing a digital ethnography on this diaspora organization's website where they're trying to reach out to people, or let's say I'm looking at the Ministry of External Affairs, Instagram or Twitter page. Okay, so am I supposed to ask for like a formal consent from them that see, I'm gonna be analyzing all that you have posted? This is my first question. And another follow-up question is that since my research is looking at how the Ministry of External Affairs, how has it been tapping the Indian community abroad? How has it been communicating with them? So the first, ministry's mission that came online was in 2013. Okay, so I have a timeline now. Okay, like from 2013 to 26, I have 13 years to look at things. But could you like just what do you think, in your opinion, how can I navigate this like yearly and in what way? Thank you.
So again, one thing is that digital ethnography is looking at the how cultures and communities are formed largely in online spaces. So uh, it might sound very similar with content analysis, where you look at a lot of data and analyze the data. So there's a slight distinction between content analysis and digital ethnography. So depending on your research question, you can take on whatever approach is best suited. So in content analysis, you can collect data from the past, like it's fine. You collect it in bulk. You iteratively code what you actually see. From the codes, you generate themes, and then you can come up with findings. You could also use reflexive thematic analysis or like various other kind of approaches to like do this alongside. In ethnography, largely you are like there is a certain sense of participation or like certain sense of continuous involvement, where over the period of time you are actually developing a sense of a thing. And in regard to consent, not always the consent is actually possible. For example, if a WhatsApp group have like some 700 people, you cannot take consent of all the people individually. So the best practice is how do you minimize the harm in such contexts, where like your research is not actually causing any harm to the participants. This situation inverses when you are looking at powerful objects, powerful subjects, where the harm can be upon you. Like if you are going to monitor government organizations or things in a particular way, then it's a different set of considerations. Or in my case, for example, when I did 2 years of digital ethnography on YouTube bloggers, I did not take an active consent from them, but I took certain kind of measures to like uh, for the data to reach back to the particular person whom I am like basically by anonymizing the data or like altering the data in a way that or translating the data from one language to another, so that if you copy paste in Google search or something, it won't go back, or like people cannot immediately identify the creator, who the creator is. So these are steps which you can take. And but if you are collecting data from, let's say, a Facebook group or a closed Facebook group or something like that, where you have already have community moderators, it is reasonably expected that you would be taking a permission from the moderator, or like you would be announcing in the group that you are actually doing this particular research. Uh, so again, like there is a huge debate over it. There's a section of scholars who argue that things which are posted in public do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy. That's one like section of scholars who hold on to that. But lately we see a lot of scholars or like reviewers also pushing back against this approach and saying that like just because the data is public, you cannot take it. So I think the scholarly consensus, particularly among the reviewer community, is more leaning towards where possible, reduce the harm if you are not able to take the consent, but where possible, take the consent.
Thank you so much.
Great.
That answers my questions. Thank you.
Perfect. So we also have a question from Anna. Anna has asked, how far can we say that a digital community represents a real life community, especially in cases where the digital literacy and access is very less?
Yeah, like again, what you're writing is largely about the community which you have observed in a particular sphere. So it's not an exercise about how objectively you are presenting what is out there. It's more like what is out there, what you see, and what like because these are cultures, right? For example, there's a lot of streamers. The way they behave in their personal life would be radically different from the way they behave in online spaces. But still, it matters because it still is a form of cultural production which influence our society norms, a lot of other things. So you're looking at what you can observe. So like, if you see that like, okay, the networks extends far beyond your own, what you're looking at the screen, like in my case, I saw that some of the like online Uber communities also have annual programs, which is hosted annually in Toronto. So in such cases, you can go to this kind of try to go to these kind of physical venues and also see like how things are unfolding. So it's you're not always it's more about theory building in some sense. Most of ethnographies are. It's like it's an attempt to do thick description and a sort of like big T or small T theory building. So it's perfectly fine that it's not a competition to like capture as the volume and breadth of how the society is. Society is anyway multiple, so it's not humanly possible to capture it as such. So it's fine to go beyond, like go with like what is a cultural production over there, like.
Absolutely. And I think these aspects of digital literacy and access play into the theory building as well. We also have a question from her that says, often online content can be deleted or taken down due to censorship. So will this affect the credibility? Is her question.
No, again, it's not a like in ethnographic exercises. It's not, reviewers are not bothered about the credibility or how the data loss which you had because of surveillance. Because if there is surveillance or like censorship which has affected your data set, that itself is a finding. So that would go into your like, it would be interesting finding to add on. So it's good. Like again, like it's the attempt is not about capturing all what has happened, but looking at all what has happened or what you can see and try to make sense of what is the form of cultural production, what kind of meanings are produced, and what these meanings actually tell us in terms of theory. So this digital ethnography is largely about this. So it's perfectly fine to uh, like lose some data. It's possible. You might also lose data when like drives which you have stored this get deleted and things like this kind of things happens. So like that's why I said like it's more important to look for your field notes, what you write, what you interpret. It's largely how it depends on the more memos you write, your writing becomes easier at a later stage.
Absolutely. And I think, as you mentioned at the very start, to see the space as a live social space in sense of where, access, censorship, and all of this kind of plays into the makings of that social space. So very rightly put. We do have a question now from Rishav. Rishav, you can feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Thanks, Ashique, for wonderful presentation and Kash for this initiative. So actually, I'm researching upon right upon, and I'm thinking to take it upon, but I'm not sure. So I'm just confused. So bear with me. So I was thinking to research upon internet shutdown and how the public digital sphere where it is closed and what was the socio-political impact happens when the internet shutdown. And it's a kind of prolonged internet shutdown, 6 months, 7 months, usually happen in Kashmir, Manipur, and other spaces. So I was thinking ki if I have to do socio-political impact, I have to also go to field work for the spaces where the internet shutdown has been in place so that I can go for fieldwork kind of. But again, I also have to do a field kind of digital fieldwork where I have to collect key how much digitally connected and how much their life is digitally embedded in their life in sort of. So I was confused regarding how to materialize this research project and particularly about the methodology if I have to combine or in which sense I can do and how much it's plausible to do this kind of work. So that's why I'm particularly confused. So if you could say some insights about that.
To study internet shutdown per se, digital ethnography is not the best method for it. But if you're looking at conversations or communities who are actively resisting internet shutdown and there are particular online forums or things like that, for assessing and analyzing that, like digital ethnography might be a very useful approach. Like there needs to be a community of some sort which is actually working around internet shutdowns. But if you're looking for the instances of internet shutdown, when it happened, when it did not happen, the platform data per se would not say anything. The way in which people would approach such is like using approaches from sensing technologies or like looking, or even if you like file RTIs on like internet shutdowns, rates and things like that, you would get some sort of responses. And the socio-political impacts of internet shutdown, I think it is best to go for a qualitative interview or focus group discussion, which would get you much more sense of how people were affected during these points. or you look for like, is there any active community which is actually fighting against internet shutdown? I remember there was certain WhatsApp groups which was functioning during the farmers movement, where like they used meshing technologies to overcome the internet technologies and things like that. But if you have access to such communities, it makes sense to do digital ethnography of how the community actually is actively responding to these kind of things. But otherwise, like just by keyword search or something, you're just going to get some descriptions of what happened and things like that. I think it's more useful to go for traditional methods and then other forms of data collections, I think.
Thank you so
Thank you, Risha, for that question as well. I believe Ashwati had a question towards the end, but I'm not able to see her on the meet. So if Ashwati is here,
She's left the
just
meeting actually. She had to
ah,
go for something else, so she messaged me.
perfect. Not a problem. Absolutely. With that, we will wrap up our session for today. If you have any more questions or anything you'd like to follow up or ask later on. Oh, I think Avichal has a question and he's unable to raise his hand. Avichal, are you able to unmute? We will take that as our last question for the day. If not, if are you able to
Hello,
write it on the chat box? Yeah. Okay.
hello. I'm audible.
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much, Ashique, for this amazing presentation. And I'm a research scholar working in JNU, and I am currently working upon digital hate on social network platforms, and particularly focusing upon the caste-based hate speech that is being perpetuated on these online platforms. And I am taking well, I'm planning to take three platforms, social network platforms, that is X, Instagram, and Twitter, because they are diverse among themselves. Because Twitter is X is more on information based, Instagram has its visual centric approach, and Facebook because it has many users in India. So while focusing upon my research and listening to your presentation, so it's a very I get a sense of it's a very time consuming project. And because I was not so much aware about the new field of digital ethnography, so earlier I was just planning to do a content analysis, but now I really want my uh, research design to include digital ethnography. So I was wondering, is it feasible to do my research on these three platforms? And one important aspect of of my research is also the regulatory frameworks that are there to curb or control the hate speech. So there is also a very big debate of free speech versus hate speech in my research as well. So I just wanted to ask you this question: is it feasible to do research on these three platforms?
Yeah, I think it's possible, but you might have to narrow it down uh, the subject a bit, because caste hate speech in general is very broad category. So if I would have been doing the same project, I probably would be selecting a particular topic, let's say reservation or something like that. I would narrow down the topic to
Sorry to interrupt, but I just forgot to add. So yeah, to operationalize the project, I'm using two basic things, like reservation is one thing, and then caste-based atrocities are one thing, and to specifically focus upon the account from the people belong to marginalized communities. So I've selected 10 accounts, and I wanted to do research through those accounts. So yeah, through reservation or caste-based approach, or even assertion in that sense. So
so ideally, like in the observation phase, to not cognitively overload yourself. That is why it's always better to narrow down the niche. So even if like you're taking one particular topic, you will find immense lot of hate speech. There is no dearth of hate speech. And there's you could also look for uh, the ways in which people are responding it. That's how it becomes a more a community oriented action too, like how people are doing it, what are like the texts behind it, like how people are responding to it. So like if you are comparing multiple platforms, then you might have to define why you are taking multiple platforms. uh, like it can be justified because like these kind of interactions transfers like circulate over the various platforms. So even if you're studying WhatsApp and like Twitter, it would make perfect sense. One is a closed group, so it would have a very different kind of uh, nature in the way people talk about things. Whereas in a very publicly open platform like X, the interaction or the nature would be different, where you might also encounter a lot of anonymized account and bots which is doing this. So it is possible to do it, but I think it is better to narrow down as much as possible and see how much you can cognitively handle these kind of things. Like when I was doing this, it was quite boring too. Like it's not always a good experience. I don't like vegetarian foods, and watching bland food preparing over a period of time was quite intensively boring. And the problem with when you're doing digital ethnography, you cannot judge the participants either. So you have to uh, like actively look for why they are saying what they are saying. And particularly when working with hate speech and that kind of content, to understand the point from which the users are saying this, it could also be a lot of emotional burden on you as well. So like, but it's doable. People have done it. It can be done. But like your own mental health also would be like shaped by the nature of content, because the problem is how do we not judge the person, but yeah, because we know some of these contents are like really like nasty or bullshit, but still we have to engage within a way which is like okay, like let me think of like why it's happening, what are the nature of their interactions. So just yes, this is also the reason why it is very time taking process, because it takes a lot of time to get immersed in really to get into the point why they're doing what they're doing. But it's perfectly doable. And if you want to see anti hate speech kind of literatures, you could actually look up Murali Shanguma Venon. Like he has Murali also have a caste and technology syllabi which he earlier put forth. It should be in the Oxford Internet Studies lecture series too. So you could find that. And also International Dalit Solidarity Network also have a report on caste hate speech. So they have defined the category very meaningfully and things like that. So there's a lot of like policy based works which has happened in this space, and this might be something which you can actually catch up on too. But it's perfectly workable, provided that you narrow down it as much as possible. To don't underestimate the cognitive overload. It will be a lot to consume such contents over a period of time.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is, with that, before I completely wrap, I just want to say if anybody has more questions, feel free to drop that into our email. We have put it on the chat box. So any questions that kind of come up after you've had some time to sit with all of this, feel free to kind of share it with us and we'll get back to you. I also want to take some time to thank Ashique for that lovely, insightful session. I think we've taken a lot of things to go back and even see how we can incorporate that into our own research, since the digital space plays such